In this session, we will discuss two setup pages for Denari, the Company Information page and the Company Preferences page. Let's begin with Company Information. We'll go to the Admin tab and then Company Information. This is a page that you won't use very often, but you may want to make a change to a few settings from time to time. Let's look at the fields on this page. The first is the company name. You'll notice that it's a required field, indicated by the little red X next to the field. This field has two purposes. First, it's used by Synergy internally, especially in tech support. It lets us identify which Denari client we are working with in tech support. Second, it shows up on the home page when you log in. This may not be a huge benefit. However, if your organization has multiple Denari companies, it will serve as a reminder about which one you're working in. The address fields here are no longer used, and you can leave them blank. Suppress country. By default, Denari assumes that all of our clients are in the U.S. Therefore, when you print statements or reports that show the donor's name and address fields, Denari will not include the country, since you don't need that field within the U.S. That doesn't work for our Canadian clients, however. When you're mailing to the U.S., you need to have the country printed, but don't need to have Canada printed. So for you Canadians, when you set up your name records, you'll need to choose a country. You can then come here and select Canada in this field. Denari will then print the country you selected in the name record, like the US, but suppress or not print Canada. The gift import model refers to the Excel gift import feature. There are three methods, and nearly everyone chooses the general method here because this model is the easiest and simplest. We'll discuss all three models in a separate training session covering gift import. In almost all cases, you can set this to general. This whole next section, manual EFT processing, is to some degree no longer used. At one time, we used this older model for processing EFTs. We have a couple of clients still using that model, so we don't want to remove those fields yet. Any new clients are using the newer EFT model, so you can skip these fields. In the notification parameters section, we find first the credit card notification user field. If you're using credit cards through Denari, Denari will send a notification message letting you know when credit cards have been declined. That report will show up in the inbox of the user that you select here. The bad data letter, when a credit card transaction is declined, Denari can print this letter for you. And if you wish to use it, you can simply drop it into the mail to the donor. It will come in your inbox along with the notification. By default, it's an 8.5 by 11 page. The top of that page is a letter body that you can set up in the Gifts tab /letters and then select it here. And that's what Denari will use for the bad data letter. It just lets donors know that they need to update their credit card information with you. The Auto Swap Alternate Address field. This field refers to alternate addresses that you can set up for your name records when appropriate. As part of that setup, you can indicate which months of the year the alternate will become the primary address. If you check this box, Denari will automatically swap the alternate and make it the primary, and then swap it back for the other months. Unchecking this box will of course not allow Denari to make that switch automatically. Limit missionary name editing. This field only applies to those who are using the missionary module. Checking this box will prevent your missionaries from changing the name and address information of their donors through their login screen. The fiscal year and fiscal year day fields. These two fields refer to your fiscal year. There are some reports in Denari that allow you to choose fiscal year as the relative date range. That's usually easier than entering the beginning and ending dates. This is also an optional setting for the stats that appear on the home page that allow Denari to calculate giving stats per fiscal year rather than calendar year. You will set that fiscal year here. The month field is the month that your fiscal year begins, and the day is the day that it begins. Duplicate checking. It can be a fuzzy process. When you add a new name record to your data, Denari does a duplicate check to see if there are name records already in your data that might match the one you are adding. It then gives you the choice to continue to add the new record or not. By default, Denari checks the last name field, the first 10 digits of the street address, and the first 5 digits of the zip code. If it finds a match in all 3 of those, then it will flag that record as a potential duplicate. The problem is that there are many circumstances where matches in those fields result in a record that is not a duplicate. For example, you may have a mother and father record already in your data. Their son, who's living at home, decides to make a donation. He has the same last name, same street address, and the same zip code, but he's not a duplicate. You also have the problem where someone may enter the street name one way while someone else enters it a different way. No computer program will be able to know what you're thinking when you type that street differently than the one originally in the data. So Denari won't see that as a duplicate. There are many other circumstances that make it difficult for Denari to identify with 100% certainty all the duplicates in your data. So the idea of the duplicate check is to limit them to as much as possible. It won't be a perfect solution. But Denari does give you the ability to play with these settings if you'd like. You could, for example, check this first box, dupe check on email. When you check any of the fields in this section, the defaults mentioned earlier are no longer used. Denari will now use the criteria that you select here. So again, if you check that first field, Denari will look for any name records with matching email addresses, and that's all it's looking at. If you check the second field, dupe check on phone, then Denari will add that with an OR operator, which means that if a name record has a matching email address or a matching phone number, then Denari will flag that as a potential duplicate. The more you check here, the more Denari will look at. If it finds a match in any of these fields you indicate, it will flag it as a duplicate. There are a couple fields here that need a little explanation. The fields that have multiple criteria, like zip, street, and last name, means that Denari will look at all 3 fields and needs to find a match in all 3 to match that record. So if you choose that option and also check the email option, then Denari would need to find a match in the zip, street, and last name fields or the email fields. So either one of those again will result in a flagged duplicate. In the third option, we have the term fuzzy. This option is actually trying to interpret what you mean. If it sees the last name of SMITH in one record and SMIHT in the new record, it might see the similarity and flag that as a potential duplicate. This is not a perfect system, however, but it may help pick up a few more duplicates. The last option refers to soundex of name. This too is trying to find anything in the last name field that is remotely similar to an existing name record. Checking this box, however, usually results in a lot of flagged records. It's pretty liberal and tends to see just about anything as a duplicate. Again, you can play with these settings to see what works best for you. The Canadian credit card text field. In this reporting options section, we have the Canadian credit card text field. This is a field used by Canadian organizations using Denari's credit card features. That will be explained in more detail when we set up your Canadian credit card module if you are a Canadian organization. Hide mass email on donor profile. When you use the mass email output from Name Segmenter, Denari can create a contact record of that email for each of the donors in the Name Segment output. This gives you a permanent record of that email that was sent to that donor, or to each donor. Some of Denari's clients prefer that and some do not. If you do a mailing to 5,000 names, for example, you'll have 5,000 contact records created. Checking the box will not allow that to happen. Mass email all addresses on file. As you can read in the text above this field, when using the mass email output from Name Segmenter, it will, by default, only send email to the primary email address. Checking this box will cause Denari to send an email to all of the email addresses listed for each donor. So if you have if a donor has 3 email addresses, that person will get 3 emails. And then these last 3 fields on this page are generally not needed and are used by Synergy staff. You can skip these fields. So that finishes the company information page. If you make any changes here, hit save at the top or bottom of the page. Now let's move on to company preferences. We'll go to the admin tab and then company preferences. This page allows you to set default preferences for many of the fields and functions in Denari. For example, if most of your names come from the state of Florida, then you could go to the default state field and enter that abbreviation. Now, when you add a new name record, that field will be filled in automatically for you, and you will be able to change it if needed. Most of the fields on this page are self-explanatory, so we'll only hit the ones that need some explanation. The first field to look at is at the top, the year for year-to-date calculation. This is an important field. There are a few places in Denari where the year-to-date is calculated, like the thank you receipt, the donor's giving stats, etc. Denari simply adds up the gifts for the year set in this field. So why doesn't Denari know what year it is and use that automatically? Normally, in the first week of January, you'll be receiving gifts that were intended for the previous year. When you print thank you receipts for those previous year gifts, your donors will want to see the year-to-date for that previous year. So this field allows you to change the setting as needed. For example, on January 1st, you can come to this field and change it to the new year. During that week, you may enter gifts dated for that new year. You can run receipts for those gifts, and Denari will calculate the year-to-date for the new year. But also during that week, you may enter gifts for the previous year. The batch that you enter them in will have a date from the previous year, probably December. If you run receipts for those gifts without making any changes to this setting, Denari will print the year-to-date for the current year. So you will need to change this setting back to the previous year first, run the receipts for that year, and then change it back to the new year as needed. You can do that as often as you'd like to get the correct year-to-date on your receipts. Remember, Denari is using the gift date on the batch and the year that you've set here to calculate year-to-date. It's also important to point out that this setting only applies to the year-to-date calculation. It doesn't affect any other statistics or reports. At the bottom of the first column, we find the Allow Edit of Donor Intro Appeal. By default, Denari sets up the source code field, the one that you select when you're adding new names, as a non-editable field. That field tracks what fundraising function generated that name record in your data, and the assumption is that you won't ever need to change that field. However, sometimes it is necessary to make a change, so you can check this box, which will then turn that field on the name record page into an editable field. You can come back and uncheck it whenever you want to turn it back into an uneditable field. The default to multi-sponsorship field only applies to clients using the sponsorship module. By default, Denari assumes that all sponsored names will have only one sponsor or pledge. Checking this box will change that to allow multiple sponsors per sponsored name. You can also change this on an individual basis as well, allowing multiple sponsors for just one sponsored name record, but this changes that on a global level. The last field to look at on this page is at the bottom of the second column, Street and City to Proper on Output. If you're using the standardization feature, when Denari standardizes a name record, it puts it into the format dictated by the U.S. Post Office. That means that the street and city are in all uppercase and the name fields are in upper and lowercase. This is a post office thing, not a Denari thing. By default, when that prints on statements like your thank you receipts, it will print in just that format. But you can change that here if you'd like. There are four options. The first is as is without any transformation. This simply means that it will print it as you see it in your data. The second, proper without punctuation. Proper here means that it will be upper lowercase. The first letter of the name, for example, will be capitalized and the rest of the letters will be lowercase. There will be no punctuation. Proper with punctuation is pretty self-explanatory. And then the last one is all uppercase. This just puts everything, name, address, city, in all uppercase. This setting only applies to statements and reports that Denari prints. It does not change the way the data looks in the name record. This concludes this session on the company information and preferences pages. If you have any questions, please contact our tech support office through the support button at the top of Denari.